Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Amy. It's so good to be on this podcast with you. Not today as a host, but as a speaker.
Right. I
I'm
know
so
it's fun
glad
to
that,
talk about, yeah, the things we're passionate about, having these conversations. They're so key, aren't they?
yeah, absolutely. So, for our guests, welcome to the Nurse Leader Lounge. It's a podcast dedicated to helping nurse leaders become the best they can be. And today, with Dr. Amy Funderburk. Amy is the host of our podcast, and she's also an author. Claim Your Seat is the title of her book. And today, we're going to be talking about communication and connection and how important that is. And I know, Amy, in the past, we've talked about helping people belong. So, talk to me about the importance of communication and connection.
Absolutely. I really thought this was such an interesting concept after I had had a major failure as a leader myself. And I had failed to connect with people and was very focused on some processes and on some outcomes versus the people who were involved and what they needed in that moment. And as I stepped away from that failure, John Maxwell is one of my favorite people. He has a book called, You Don't Fail If You Learn, basically. And I said, okay, what am I going to learn from this situation and how do I become a better leader? And I became a John Maxwell team member. And one of the courses that we have the opportunity to go through is around communication and connection. And another book of his is Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. And I thought, what an amazing concept, because it's true that if we aren't really connecting with the people, it doesn't matter what we say or what we do. As a matter of fact, one of his favorite quotes is become one of my favorite quotes is they won't care how much you know if they don't know how much you care.
Mm,
And I can't care about somebody if I don't know them or
yeah.
take time to get to know them at all, you know?
So when you look at communication and connection, tell me what differentiates connecting from communicating. What makes
Yeah.
what does connection look like?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting when we talk about connecting, a lot of people like to talk about, well, you've got to go get buy-in and you've got to go get this and you need to communicate six different ways and you need to, but sometimes people just won't listen because we haven't paused to listen.
Mm,
And when we talk about connecting, it's about having a personal connection with individuals. I rounded recently with the CNO during Nurses Week, got the chance to go around with her and another nurse leader. And as she entered her units, it was so great because she could say things like, "This is Susie, and you know what's so great about Susie? She does XYZ and she leads this council. And you know what? She's the best painter on the side." You know what I mean? She knew things about her people and could right there in that moment while introducing that person to us, manage that person up and demonstrate that she cared about them. She was interested in knowing about them. And they were interested in engaging with her. So it wasn't a situation where she got to the floor and people kind of scatter, oh no, the suits are here, you know?
that's
What are
right.
the suits here for, you know? But instead, they stopped and they really engaged with her. Hey, how are you doing today? Because she cared about them and she knew them and had taken that time. So it's such a dramatic difference when you see that to a leader on another unit where you walk up and they're like, and people go, oh, yeah, hey, I know who you are. What do you need today? How can I help you? And it's
Yeah.
a more formal, stilted relationship.
Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's outside of the workplace, but we met a couple, my husband and I met a couple the other day, and we had dinner with them after playing golf. And before dinner was over, we realized we both had sons that were in the Marines. We
Yes.
first of all, we both had two sons and a daughter. One in
Wow.
the Marines, one we called the perfect. It was the similarities were glaring, but it took that moment of just getting to know each other at an intimate level to really connect as human beings.
Yes.
And it wasn't that hard
Right.
to do that. So
Right.
why is it that leaders don't take that step in
Mhm.
the workplace? And what advice do you have for how to take that first step of connecting with their people?
Yeah. So I'll admit this isn't something that's entirely comfortable for me. I am not the extroverted, warm, let me hug everyone who comes into my, 2 foot radius, person. For me, it's a very intentional skill that I continue to build
Yeah.
because I am a very task oriented, let me get work done, goal oriented person where I'm just like, head down in charge. And then I realized, as I mentioned earlier, that I can charge ahead all I want and people aren't following me behind. It doesn't matter. So, really stopping to say, okay, how do I get them A, to care because I care? And I'm passionate about being a leader and being a great one because the reason I do this, my why, is because I want to make a difference, not just for our patients, but for our people. And I
Yes.
felt like when I got into leadership, I could really have that impact at an exponential level. Because if, the domino effect, if you will, if I can help you, then you can help your patients. And, over and over again, we can feel that impact. So for me, it's really about building the skill. A lot of people just sort of go, oh, well, I'm not an extrovert. That's not the type of person I am. This isn't a skill I can build. They're just really good at this. But the reality is exactly what you just said. How do I find something common to connect with?
Mhm.
There's a game that I've played in group settings as an icebreaker sometimes, and you get a big ball of twine
Mhm.
or, fun colored yarn is even better. And you put people in the circle and you say, okay, you start by saying, I have a dog, or whatever your comment is. And then somebody else can go, oh, I have a dog. And you throw it to them. And somebody else can say, I have a dog. And then, once you kind of run out of that one, you've got to come up with another one. My favorite color is blue. So you throw it over there. I have 3 kids. And next thing you know, you've got this amazing tapestry of connection with this ball of yarn that everyone realizes we all have things in common that make us belong, that can help us, come together and connect without me having to change who I am. And like you said, oh, we have sons in the Marines, we have, all of these commonalities, and you're gonna find those commonalities if you look for them.
Yeah. And
So that's
and
the first piece.
and the thing is that we spent a lot of time with people,
Yes,
so much time at work, and at the end of the day, if you're not intentional about it, you don't know who each other is.
completely.
I love that word, intention and
Yes,
being purposeful and intentional about it. It's great.
right.
So now that you've built a connection with your team, you've been intentional about it. I've in the past I sent questionnaires to my teams just to know little things about them, like how do you like to be recognized, or tell me
Yeah.
about your life outside of work. So that's another way to be intentional. But now that we've been intentional about it, how do you know that your communication is clear and effective?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where sometimes you've got to have the conversation. So we can get up and do a presentation. And then if people don't walk out saying the same things, it's really been interesting. I've gone and done a town hall, right? And we talk about the 5 key things or whatever it may be. And then you round on the units and you start asking people, well, how'd you feel about that? What feedback do you have? And they're like, well, I remember 3 or 2, and I'm not exactly sure how I impact them. And, so it's really one of those pieces where, part of the reason in nursing we got into the teach back process was because we needed people to communicate back to us what they think they heard
Yeah.
and what did they understand, so as we really look at critical thinking and connection and how we're communicating our vision, what are people walking away with? I'll give you an example. The time that I really struggled and had that failure was I had a unit who was really struggling with staffing and recruiting, and it was the type of unit that shouldn't have. Normally, you filled that unit with internal candidates and no problem. And we were having major issues. So I had called some of the candidates that had declined jobs and said, hey, tell me what your concerns are, what happened. And they said, well, they spent the entire interview talking about how horrible it was to work on that unit. So I didn't want to go to that unit. So when I went and met with the staff, instead of sitting down and saying, why is it so horrible? I understand staffing's bad. We're going to bring in these travelers to help fill it in the meantime. But instead of me looking to understand what their concerns were, I went in and I said, hey guys, the feedback I'm getting is that you guys are telling everyone how horrible it is. And they said, oh, so it's our fault. And I thought, oh, that is not the message I wanted them to take away. I was sitting there thinking, hey, we're going to partner and have this discussion so that we can make it all better. But their immediate takeaway was she's blaming it all on us. And I honestly, at that time in my career, this has been years ago now, wasn't sure what to do with that. I was somewhat stymied with, well, where do I go from here? And it really destroyed the trust that that team had with me because they saw it as a blame situation where I was seeing it as a problem solving situation and I was hoping to engage. But because I didn't engage in the right way, it destroyed that trust. And when we look at some of it's interesting, our most successful US presidents, they did a study and found that there were 5 key qualities that they all had. And it was vision, consensus building, trustworthiness, pragmatism, and charisma. And of those 5 skills, 4 of them require us to have connection with somebody else, right? I can't build consensus if we can't connect and trust. If we don't have trustworthiness, we're not going to have, that communication isn't going to be effective, right? And a lot of people think about charisma as a personality type, but again, it's very much something that can be a learned skill.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so important. So how do you build that if you, let's say you're not like you said, you're not an extrovert, how do you build that charisma and consensus through that connection building? And what do you have to do to take the steps to get to that level with your staff?
Right. From a one-to-one basis, it's truly about spending some time and understanding, right? Tell me about yourself. I liked what you said a minute ago. How do you like to be recognized? I had an employee one time who got star-shaped Post-it notes and gave them to me in my office and said, if about every week or so, you would just give me one of these with something on it that I did great this week, that fills my cup. And I was like, okay. And so periodically I'd pull out the star Post-it notes and write something about her and stick it on her door so that when she walked in, because I knew that was going to fill her cup. And it's not something you can do in one session, right? It's something I've got to do over time. So when we have these one-to-one meetings, it's really interesting. I was on a webinar yesterday with the ANA, and they were talking about how for every one-to-one meeting, at least every 30 days, the likelihood of retention increased by 7%.
Wow.
So just by pausing to say, I care enough to connect with you and have this conversation and have a one-to-one, on a routine basis,
Yes.
that retention rate went through the roof. And the second piece then is to have an effective one-to-one, so instead of just saying, how are things going? Here's the 3 things I have for you to focus on. What are your goals? How can I help you get there? Or is there anything you're struggling with right now? And there are some great things. I actually just recently invested in this thing called storyteller tactics or pip decks. You've probably seen them, but they have them for one-to-one meetings as well. So managers who are like, well, I'm not exactly sure what to ask or how to connect or have a little fun with it, and but they have them where there are so many tools out there. You just need to find one that's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And then when it's with a team, a bigger group, the connection is about truly building trust. And again, that's not a one-time thing. That's an over and over again thing. And a lot of times it's around closing the loop. So did you ask me a question? It's okay for me to say, I don't know. Let's find out. Are there barriers that I can remove? Is there something you guys have just been struggling with as a group and nobody's listening? It was interesting when we do some of our group sessions sometimes. Nurses will just say things like, I just need more thermometers. Can I get another glucometer? Could we just get a blanket warmer? Yeah, yeah. And sometimes there's not a lot of funds for some of those things, but sometimes I can get creative. Are there any foundation dollars? Can we go and do XYZ? How could I get some of these things just to remove those barriers? And then people go, okay, they're listening.
Mhm.
So, and they close the loop. And even if I can't get something, the fact that I went and I tried, only people only know that if I communicate it back to them. Okay, guys, I went and I asked for the blanket warmer. It's on the list. There's not dollars for it right now, but I'm going to keep you guys updated. And don't worry, I won't forget about it. At least I've got it on the list. Whereas before, they didn't know if it was even on the list,
Yeah,
right?
love that. And I've heard in the past that credibility is the foundation of leadership, and credibility is defined as doing what you say you're going to do. So
Absolutely.
listen, and they ask you for something, and you tell them this is what I'm going to do about it, and you don't do it.
Right.
You've completely, demolished the trust and the credibility that you have
100%.
as a leader. Amy, the other thing that I was gonna say about what you just did that I think leaders don't do enough is show their vulnerability.
Yes.
And I think that helps build connection because then they don't think you think you're perfect. They
Right.
know they know that you're willing to share that you've made mistakes, and
Right.
it opens them up also to share what their perhaps needs are more freely than if they think, oh my gosh, you have the answer to every question.
It's so true. The speakers that sometimes I have loved the most are the ones who are the most transparent with their learning. I don't love the speakers who come in and go, look how great I am. Here's all the things I've accomplished, ta-da. I'd rather have a speaker who goes, this is what I've learned, sometimes the hard way. And here's my story. We connect to that on a deeper level because that, like you said, it's very real. It's very clear. I can relate. I've probably been in those shoes. I had one coach who called it the ice cream on the kitchen floor moment. When you're
Mhm.
sitting on the kitchen floor just eating ice cream straight from the tub with the spoon and you're having a horrible day, the last thing you want to hear is how perfect someone else is. But what you do want to hear is how somebody else got up off the floor and figured out how to move forward. So sometimes those can be the most effective ways to connect with people.
Yeah, I love that. So earlier you talk about one-on-one connection, and when I work with nurse leaders, probably what I hear the most is, I don't have time. I have too many direct reports to
Mhm.
be able to have, regular one-on-one sessions with all my direct reports. How do you answer that? How do you address that?
It is hard. The first thing I would say is yes, it can be hard. And, back to my favorite word, it takes a lot of intention, which sometimes means not doing other things. And the second thing I would say is sometimes people think if I'm going to do a one-to-one, I've got to set aside a half an hour with every single person. And sometimes a very effective one-to-one can be done in 10 or 15 minutes. I often will schedule half an hour with some of my people just because that's the easy way it fits on my calendar. But there are quite a few times that we've had an incredibly great connecting conversation and we're done in 15 or 20 minutes. So so the first thing I would say is challenge your assumptions. Are you blocking the time very intentionally on your calendar to say, I am going to connect with these individuals today? The second thing I would say is depending on the size of your group, that is true. It could be really hard to connect every 30 days. It might be that I need to do every 60 days. There used to be a rule of thumb that when you got the Studer group training in the hospitals, if you had, I think I want to say it was 30 or 40 people, you tried to connect once a month. If you had and my numbers probably aren't right. I'm doing this from memory, 40 to 60 people. It was every other month. And if you had more than that, at least once a quarter. But it's interesting. We also used to have the 30, 60, 90-day rule after people started, right? And nowadays that doesn't apply anymore. If I wait until 30 days to meet with an associate, they're probably already gone. And I don't even know what happened to them. Now there's the pre-hire meeting, the day one meeting, the week one meeting, the week two. So our connection points are critical for retention and engagement. And sometimes, like I said, that only takes 5 or 7 minutes. Hey, I just wanted to call you and tell you welcome. I know this is week one for you. Have you gotten into everything you need to get into? Do you have your schedule for the next couple of weeks? Do you have any questions for me? We have our meeting with your preceptor and so on Monday. I'm really looking forward to seeing you. Let me know if you have any issues. That's it. I mean, that could literally be a 5-minute conversation, but I connected with that individual and they know I care, that they're here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really about, for me, I tend to schedule things on my calendar. If it's not on my calendar, I get into my tasks and my emails and my meetings, and I forget to do the things that really, really matter. And I also find that we as nurses are really great at going to meetings.
Mm.
And it was interesting. I started as the CNO in one hospital, and I sat there and looked at, the first few weeks, you just sit in the meetings and you assess and you look. And I finally asked my directors, I said, why are all of you in every meeting? I said, have you never set up a way for you guys to cover each other for different things and then report out to each other so that you could free up a number of hours a day? Because you don't all have to be in every meeting. And it wasn't something culturally that they had ever even thought about. They're like, oh, we don't have to be at every meeting. I'm like, no, not all of you don't have to be at every meeting. I don't want to be
Yeah,
at every meeting.
there's probably a little FOMO there, right?
That's right.
You're missing out if I don't go to that meeting. I don't get a say on
Yes.
this.
Yes.
So do you think some of it can be accomplished through rounding if you do if you set up your rounding well, or if you shadow some of your nurses, or when you're visiting patients, when do you think some of that could count as connecting?
I think absolutely. And I always have an agenda when I'm rounding. Because if I just walk up on the floor and say, hey guys, I'm rounding today. How's everything going? You have any issues or concerns? I'm going to get the, no, it's okay. Or we're really busy today. Thanks for stopping by. Disconnect.
Mm.
But my most recent rounding last week, for example, was going into a hospital and saying, hey guys, could I show you a couple of shortcuts to save you some time? I don't know if you know this yet. And I went into one of our systems and showed them a couple of shortcuts, and they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. This is great. Thanks so much. I said, well, hey, do you have questions about anything else? Is there anything else I can help you with? And then you get more engagement because I've already come in with some sort of value to them, and making sure they knew something and connected with them at that level. And then there's more opening up. I also had a system CNO tell me one time, because she, has to get to a lot of different hospitals. She said, I find that I have to spend at least 2 hours if I'm shadowing before people let their guard down.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
when she tries, yeah. So when
That's,
she tries to
that's a
go to
long,
a
that's a long
unit,
time.
it is. So that's different from rounding. That one's more of a, hey, I want to shadow and see your processes. But it's interesting. So I tested it once. I went down to our ER and I said, okay, guys, I can't be an ER nurse today, but you're short staffed. Things are crazy. What can I do for you? And I was just cleaning stretchers, transporting patients to the floor, restocking rooms, answering phones. And, I was there for a good 4 hours and I got a lot of information because I was willing to put on the scrubs and be in the trenches with them. And they finally opened up. So sometimes if I have an area I really need to target, it needs to be around time.
Mm.
So how do I invest that time? And, it really shows people that I'm willing, A, to help and support them when they need it. And B, I'm truly interested in what they have to say because I can see it. I'm experiencing it with them.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So Amy, I wanna not I want to cover this topic before we're done with our conversation today, and that's the topic of recognition. You talked a little bit about
Yes.
and like an example of this,
Mhm.
person who gave you the star and said,
Yeah.
write something. And how do you ensure that your recognition is genuine and meaningful?
Yes. One of the things I really enjoyed, and enjoy today, even in leader rounding or rounding with others, is getting specifics. Nancy Nurse was an amazing nurse for me last night. She did XYZ. And if Nancy is there, I'll literally walk out of a room and go, "Hey, Nancy, I just want to let you know what Miss Smith just said about you. She said you were amazing. You did XYZ. It made such a difference and was so meaningful to her. Thank you for doing that." And I like to do that right there on the floor where other people can hear me. Because A, she's getting publicly recognized. It's very specific in that moment. If a doctor comes to me later and says, "Hey, I just want you to know the ICU team did an outstanding job with this code last night. And here's some of the things," I'm going to send an email. "Hey guys, Dr. Jones came by and said, da 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 about last night. You guys did an outstanding job. Thank you for all the hard work." And the fact that I stopped and found out who was on the schedule, what happened, and sent them an email in writing with that information, that can be a very simple thing that it does take some time, but it can be incredibly impactful. And then I also try to do written thank yous and recognitions every now and then. Sometimes it's very general. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being on my team, your passion that you bring to the job, how much you do every day. And I want you to know I recognize you and I appreciate you. And I send them that card to their home.
Yes.
And, not everyone acknowledges that, and that's perfectly okay. It's about them getting acknowledged. But the people who write back to me and go, "I just can't tell you, I was having a horrible week and I opened up that card in the mail and that just changed everything. Thank you so much." So it's truly, I used to keep like a log of, when I had a ton of people underneath me. I don't have quite as many anymore, but when I had, 30, 40 people underneath me, I used to keep a log just to make sure I wasn't missing somebody. Did I get everybody a thank you card at least, once this quarter? Has somebody been recognized? And if they hadn't been recognized, I was checking, A, am I looking? Sort of that Pollyanna principle, right? If you look for the good in people, then you'll find it. And B, if I can't find it, am I addressing that issue a different way?
Mm.
Because sometimes building trust on the team is working on our poor performers, right?
Yes.
So accountability is a huge deal. So sometimes we have poor performers who don't have anything we can recognize or in fact need to be addressed in a different way. And that in of itself is a different form of communication about the culture we're
Yeah.
setting.
But I find that even with a poor performer, if you find something that they're doing well and you recognize it, that incentivizes them to do other
Yes,
things well.
I agree.
And I think that's something that we miss,
Yes.
because we were raised by being sent to the principal's office, right? You do something wrong, you go to the principal's
True.
office, go with it. But so I urge, there isn't a single individual in this world. There may be a couple of exceptions where you can't find something that they're doing well. And I encourage
Yes.
leaders to find that. Also, one of the things that, particularly when you get to higher levels of nursing leadership, like a chief nursing officer, where you have to rely on your first line supervisors and managers to
Yes,
feed information to you so that you can recognize people. And then it
absolutely.
becomes more genuine, right? Because you have the exact examples of what they're doing well. So
I
I
agree.
really love that. So Amy, I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but I do
Okay.
this every time I interview. So I have some fun questions for you.
Yes. All right.
So let's start with, other than Claim Your Seat, your book, what other book should nurse leaders read to become better leaders?
I really do like that Everyone Communicates, Few Connect with John Maxwell, and pretty much any book by John Maxwell is going to be outstanding. And I think he's got like 65. So you've got a few to choose from if you have anything. I am a huge fan of Brene Brown. Anything by Brene, because she really talks about the empathy component that we can have with people versus sympathy and how we connect in that way and why certain behaviors occur. And then I'll be honest, I love Cy Wakeman, CY Wakeman, the no ego, because one of the mistakes that people often make as a leader with communication is thinking, well, I have an open door policy and people can, come in anytime and talk with me about anything. And I'm like, yeah, but what they're doing is they're driving in their BMW, the bitch, moan and whine, and they're just dropping this load in your lap. And all they've done is stir a pot or created drama or in some way undermined maybe somebody else. And that's not the type of communication we want to have with an individual. So she has got some really strong methods that
Yeah.
you can use to say, okay, well, time out. Is that really Bob's fault? Or have you talked to Bob? Are we taking the mail to the right address? How do we address this issue? And how do we eliminate some of that whining, complaining, and venting that
Yeah.
people need to have? And I'm like, well, there's acknowledging the issues, and then there's beating them to death. So how do we then move into solutions and actions and move past the just raw negative emotions? So there's that positive communication and the negative, and those are the books that I like because they offer so much tools that you can
That's
actually use.
I love that way. So, how about one movie or limited series that is a must watch? I know you don't have a lot of time right now, but
Oh gosh, well, I enjoy the funny stuff, so things that are, and probably I don't have anything current, Big Bang Theory or, um, Monk is actually one of the ones that we've watched a few times. I have a friend who will just watch the series occasionally. So I enjoy laughing, and laughing is something that I really want to try my best to engage in.
good. It's really good for your soul.
Yes.
So, what's your favorite sports team?
My kid's volleyball team. So, that's been my entire life for so long. I haven't watched too many others. But yeah, she joins North Greenville University in the fall, and I'm gonna be excited to watch her play at college level. So that'll be my favorite team right now.
That's great. And what is your favorite place to travel to?
Locally, probably a beach, or either go up to the mountains. I really enjoyed a few years ago. My brother was stationed in Greece, and getting to go there was just so different from the States. When we talk about things being antique here, very different from antique there, right? Or ancient, if you will. So that was a wonderful trip. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. And what is your favorite music genre or artist?
So I'm kind of a funny mix. My liked songs on Spotify are really a mix of everything from pop to country to, Ed Sheeran and if I just like a
Taylor
song.
Swift, you're not a Swiftie?
Well, I have some of her songs too. Yeah, my kids definitely are, so I've got a little bit of everything, either because my kids played it and I'm like, oh, I like that one. I'll add it to my songs, so I've got sort of an eclectic mix of things.
So last question, what is the best piece of advice you can give someone based on your life experience as a nurse leader?
Really focusing on emotional intelligence. I think it's one of those critically important pieces because, again, for me, I had a disconnect between my personality style, which is, if you know DISC, I'm a very strong D. So I'm very decisive. I'm ready to move forward. I'm very task oriented, like I mentioned earlier. And I needed to be more people oriented, which is not natural necessarily, but it has been learned. And because I've been able to learn the people orientation side, I can pause. So instead of picking up the call and just going, hey, where are we at with such and such? It's more, hey, how are you doing? How's it going? Any, how was vacation last week? Because I actually do care about those answers. I just didn't think of them first, right? That wasn't natural for me. So now it's, let me ask the questions I care about, and then we'll get to the tasks that we need to discuss, right? So, really learning that piece for me was key to developing the ability to have the connections.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, this is an example of building a connection, right? Amy and I know each other really well, but I've never asked you these questions before.
Right.
And those are not hard questions to ask people to start looking for things that you have in common. So
Absolutely.
Amy, what a pleasure it's been to have this chat with you
Yeah,
today.
you too. Thanks so much, Norma. As always, I enjoy spending time with you, and thank you.
Good. So listen to the podcast. Listen to all of the podcasts that we have. We're striving to make you a better leader and have some fun in the process.
Absolutely. It's our passion.
All right.